Okay, welcome everyone to our third webinar for AAJA Women and Non-Binary Voices. We are really happy to welcome Emma Carew Grovum today. Emma, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Emma Carew Grovum. I'm a newsroom consultant and trainer based in New York City. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm really excited to chat with everyone today.
Great. I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Shirley Qiu. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm one of the co-directors of AAJA Women and Non-Binary Voices. So thanks to everyone for tuning in today. And just as a reminder, if you have questions for Emma, you can post them in our Facebook event, or you can tweet out with the hashtag AAJA Hangout. Okay, so let's get started. Emma, could you tell us about your career path, starting from how you first got into journalism?
Yeah, so I was kind of one of those like very type A kids who knew I wanted to like work on my high school newspaper and stuff like that. And so I went to a newspaper camp when I was 15 for my freshman year of high school. It was called the Urban Journalism Workshop. It's now called 360 Journalism. It's based at the University of St. Thomas, and it's a 2-week residential camp for high school students of color who are interested in learning about journalism. So I basically fell in love with the career path and wanted to become a reporter ever since, and worked at my high school paper, worked at my college paper, got a bunch of internships. Thought for a while I was going to do like data and business reporting, so I did like a lot of work around those areas. And then my first job in journalism after college was at the Chronicle of Philanthropy as like a research assistant for their data team. After that, I went to the Star Tribune in Minneapolis and was a local news reporter. And then I moved to the web desk where I was the first social media editor for the paper, but we didn't call it that because no one knew what that was at the time. It was 2010. It was like a weird time for social media and the internet in general, as they relate to news. So I was there for about 2 years, and then I worked at a cooking magazine briefly for 6 months as kind of their digital all-hands type person. And then we moved to DC. I'm married to another journalist, Jake. He currently works at the New York Times, but his job led us back to DC at the time. So we went to DC, and I went back to the Chronicle for a while. And then I went to Foreign Policy magazine, where I managed the homepage and social media and newsletters. And then I ultimately moved into like it was a made-up role, to be honest, but like we called it the director for digital content development, which meant that I was basically, we would call it a product manager today. I was overseeing products and like the CMS mostly. From there, I got hired to the New York Times opinion section, and then I came to the Daily Beast for 3 years, where I was assistant managing editor, and then moved to the product team. And I've been freelancing since January.
Awesome. So you've had a pretty varied journalism career. Could you talk about how you made some of those transitions between roles?
Yeah. So again, like I was a really aggressive and ambitious young person, and I just wanted a seat at the table. You know, I think when you graduate from college in 2009, you can't enter this field not wanting to save journalism a little bit, you know, like, so for me, for my peers, for a lot of my friends, you know, it wasn't just we wanted to show up and do good work. We wanted to fix our newsrooms. We wanted to change the industry and make things better. And that was a real challenge. You know, there wasn't space for young, talented digital people. In like 2009, 2010, 2011, there was a lot of like, sit quietly and wait till you're quite a bit older, and then we'd love to hear your ideas. But for now, just kind of do whatever we tell you to. So I made a lot of my career choices based on leaving bad jobs, you know, and leaving jobs that I wasn't growing in. I've always put my growth and my development at the very forefront of my prioritization with my career.
And how did you advocate for yourself when you tried to move into new roles?
Pretty hard. So I think it's a little bit about being clear about what your goals are and kind of saying like, you know, I want to see what digital is all about. I want to work on the website, or I want to try this thing and try it for a project. But, you know, at Foreign Policy, I really made a hard sell for this kind of new upgraded job, and was able to negotiate for a pretty good salary bump and all that. I had been there for a year and a half, so like that helped. I had just managed the transition and migration from a bad CMS to a good CMS. So that had bought me a lot of like goodwill. And then ultimately I came to my boss and I said, here is a job across town at NPR that is only to manage the homepage. Never mind, I'm also doing social media, newsletters, CMS, all this other stuff. And it pays $35,000 more than I currently make. So tell me why I shouldn't apply for this job. And that was like pretty compelling to him. You know, he was like, oh, I didn't realize you were that underpaid, which is a separate issue. And, you know, I brought him like articles about why product thinking was important for newsrooms. I brought him a list of my achievements. I brought him, you know, I made a plan for my department for the next year, even though I did not have a department or a budget. But I was like, here's how I would use 2 interns. Here's what I would do with them. Here's what we would accomplish as a team. Here's why I think that adds value for the newsroom and our goals as a company.
Nice. So I read in a University of Minnesota alumni spotlight about you that you said it felt like a crisis when you realized reporting might not be your strong suit. That really resonated with me because I felt that way after graduating from college and feeling burnt out reporting for just 4 years. And I've talked to others who have sort of felt similarly. So could you talk more about that and how you worked through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think at heart, I'm still a storyteller, right? No matter what I do, I'm trying to advance acts of journalism and make it easier and better for stories to be distributed and better inform our communities. Beat reporting was like not my thing. I was good at it in college and I was like fine at it as an adult, but like I wasn't going to win a Pulitzer Prize. And I wasn't going to like be the type of person who just had like a 2-page long list of page A1 ideas for the Sunday paper. And so I'm still fast in a breaking news situation. I'm still good at clean, tight copy on deadline. But like, to me, there was other things that I was better at than my like level of goodness at being a reporter. So it was like, I'm always going to be like this good of a reporter, but I saw a lot of potential in social, in digital, in other places to really raise my game. And so, yeah, it was really hard. I remember sitting in my managing editor's office sobbing, like all I had ever wanted to do was be a reporter, specifically at the Star Tribune, my hometown newspaper that put me through college, and I interned there. And it's not that I wasn't succeeding, it's just that I wasn't thriving in that role. And I wanted a new opportunity. And thankfully, the paper was willing to give it to me for, you know, the year that I worked on that team. And it was really hard. And it's been a battle for sure with like friends who are reporters or colleagues who are reporters who are like, oh, well, you're not a reporter anymore. You're not really a journalist anymore. But I really pushed back against that because I feel like I have a much more holistic view of the industry and of our companies, of our newsrooms than say someone who just files a story and then goes home for the night, right? Like I have been involved with building websites, building CMSs from like the soup to nuts all the way up to a piece of software that's used by the company every day. I have like a big picture view of how journalism works and its role in our society and where different newsrooms fit in that infrastructure.
So what advice would you give to journalists who are interested in making a pivot within journalism, like from reporting to social or to product?
Just try things, you know, like, so for me, it's less about what job do I want next or like, what do I want to be when I grow up? It's more about like, what skills do I want in my toolbox to help me be successful wherever I go, right? So for me, I was already teaching other reporters in my bureau how to use social media for reporting tools, right? And getting them signed up for Twitter. Again, this was 2010, it was a very different time. You know, 55-year-old reporters who had been working at the Star Tribune for 30 years had other stuff on their plate. They were not interested in a 23-year-old kid coming in and being like, hey, the internet thing is happening and you should, you know, join the club. So it's an uphill battle. And so I think it's really about the relationships you build in your newsroom and how you tell your story about why, you know, whatever it is you're evangelizing is important. And then just try stuff, you know, like raise your hand and volunteer to join a committee or work on a project or partner with a new team. That's the best way to lay that groundwork. And then when the time comes, you can point back at your achievements and say, hey, I really want to try product. I really want to try social. And here's all the things that I've done so far to demonstrate that. I worked in like product adjacent roles and technology adjacent roles for almost 3 years before I moved into product formally.
So is there anything else that you would say prepared you to work in hybrid roles, like at the intersection of social media, data, technology, and product?
I think curiosity, right? Like I really like to know how things work. So for me, it wasn't enough to just know that like if I filed my story for an editor, it would go in the newspaper, it would go online. Like I wanted to know what it's going to look like online. I wanted to know what it would look like on mobile. I wanted to know what it would look like on social media. In today's terms, that would be like, I want to know what it's going to look like on Apple News, or I want to know what it's going to look like in our app. I want to know what it's going to look like on Flipboard. And for me, it was very important to kind of get that big picture of all the things and kind of how the dots are connected. I also think, this is going to sound really dumb, but I was in high school marching band and a wind ensemble, and I honestly think that working in media and being in like a musical ensemble have so many parallels about like the importance of quieter voices and like harmony across departments and collaboration and stuff like that. And so I don't obviously think that like you need to be a musician to become a journalist or someone working in a hybrid role, but it's a lot of empathy. It's a lot of, so I also think my Gemini comes in here a lot, right? There's like two sides of every story. There are two ways or more ways to approach every problem and solution. And that empathy for the other person on the other side of the table and what they're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to accomplish. I mean, you're usually trying to accomplish the same thing. It's just a different way of getting to it.
Mm-hmm. So if you're just joining us now, we are speaking with Emma Carew Grovum. Just a reminder to post your questions for Emma in the Facebook event or tweet with the hashtag AAJA Hangout, and we'll get to questions at the very end of the webinar. So how does your consulting work now compare with your previous work in newsrooms?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I really love what I'm doing now because it's so flexible. I'm really kind of like a generalist, right? So like I've done reporting, I've done data, I've done social media, I've done newsletters, I've done a lot of things, and I'm pretty good at a lot of them, but I'm not like an expert. I'm not going to write a book about newsletters or teach like a college level course about social media. And so that generalist has really helped me as a consultant to have a broad range of things that I like to do and work on. And so it means that I can take on a lot of different clients. It means that I'm getting paid now to do things that I used to do for free, which I didn't realize was a thing. So for example, like I do a lot of mentoring and coaching of like friends, colleagues, peers, mentees, whatever. And like now I get paid for that because some of the projects that I'm working on are around mentorship and coaching. And so that has been like very gratifying to be able to monetize like my softer skills.
And what would you say to people who are considering freelancing or working for themselves?
Oh, it's like a lot of things, right? So first of all, I do not know how anyone makes a living as a freelance reporter, like primarily being a wordsmith, because the rates are so terrible right now. So I write like a little bit, but not a lot, because I can make so much more money as a consultant doing training, doing coaching, doing product strategy, doing leadership management training and coaching and stuff like that. So it's really about cobbling together a mix of like big fish and small fish so that you're getting paid regularly, but you have flexibility and it's not getting boring and it's exciting. And then like getting really good at tracking your time. I'm like still not super great about that. And then all the paperwork. There's just a ton of paperwork that comes with being a freelancer. Like I don't have a printer, and so that is like sometimes I wish I had one. I guess like that would be my tip, is buy a printer and just like stay super organized, right? Like I live in New York City, so I don't have like an office, for example. So I'm just sitting like at my kitchen table, which is in my living room, which is also my art table. You know, so it's like if you can have like dedicated space for your freelancing stuff, I think that is probably really helpful. But like I would not necessarily advocate that other people follow the like, just sit at your kitchen table all day like I do. Yeah.
So you've done a lot of work around diversity, mentorship, and uplifting underrepresented voices in journalism. I know this work can get emotionally exhausting, especially in newsrooms where maybe you're pushing back against the status quo. Could you talk a little bit about how you've navigated that in the past?
Yeah, that's a big one. I mean, every newsroom wants their people of color to help them solve their diversity problem, but nobody wants to like compensate those people for that work, for example. So it's like, you know, I've had bosses say to me like, well, you work here, it's part of your job. And I was like, yeah, but like a lot of other people work here. They don't have to do any of this. So like, I think it's keeping track of what kind of work you're doing so that when like raise time comes, you're asking for that compensation. You're saying like, I'm putting in an extra 2 to 10 hours a week on AAJA stuff I'm doing to better our industry, or, you know, things that I'm doing that I'm going to job fairs on the weekend to look for candidates for you, my boss, my employer, my company, you know, like things like that, and making sure that you're being recognized for it because it is very thankless work. I also have started to push really hard for allyship from our peers who have historically privileged backgrounds. So whether those are male peers or white peers or whatever. Sorry?
What happened there? Okay. I just muted everyone. Sorry about that.
Allies, right. So trying to like get other people to do the work with you. So I gave a SourceCon talk this summer with Hannah Wise from Canada, and we talked a lot about like, what can people do to recognize their own privilege and then be bold and brave and stand with people from historically marginalized backgrounds so that that workflow gets a little bit evened out.
And what sort of tips do you have for approaching people about that?
Well, I wrote an article for Source, so there's like a bunch of tips in that article, but like they're little things like putting your pronouns in your Twitter bio or your email signature, or you know, like if someone says something in a meeting and you notice that like several male executives have talked over that woman and like missed her point entirely, you might raise your hand and be like, hey, Shirley made a great point. Like, let's revisit that. And so speaking up on behalf of your colleagues and repeating their things, right? Like my husband is, we talk about this a lot, is that Harvard Business Review has this research that says that women and people of color often get penalized for talking about diversity at work. That means that my husband, 6'3", white guy, great husband, love him to death, he could walk into his employer and say, you know what'd be cool? Better diversity in our newsroom. We could walk into the same newsrooms back to back, have the same exact messaging. It's always going to sound like a better idea coming from him. And that's just the truth of like reality, is that like he has a privilege that I don't. He looks like most newsroom managers. I don't. He speaks the language and sounds like he came from the right places. And so it's that imbalance of power. And it's really about saying like, are you going to be passive in this situation, or are you going to step up and do the right thing, right? And like, there's no gold stars, right? You don't get a sticker because you called out some racist shit on Twitter, or you don't get like a gold badge for like, you know, retweeting 2 extra women today. Like, you're just doing the right thing because it's the right thing, and you should just feel good about yourself. So that's like, I think can be hard to like talk to our peers and colleagues and say like, hey man, I really need you to back me up in this meeting because I'm going to do something kind of radical. Or like, hey, I noticed that you repeated what I said and then everyone like really liked the idea. Maybe you could try to credit me for that idea next time. Like those aren't easy conversations to have, especially given that like likely a privilege or power imbalance already exists.
Mm-hmm. So what advice do you have for other journalists who are trying to do that work in their news organizations, but running into difficulty getting buy-in from their managers?
Oh, I mean, if you can't convince your managers that diversity matters, then like you should probably be looking for a new workplace, to be honest. Again, like that's part of why I've left a lot of jobs, right? Is that it was just like, I can't succeed in a newsroom that's not going to invest in diversity. I'm not going to succeed in a newsroom that, you know, only hires white male executives and doesn't promote from within. So I think it's a little bit about like recognizing the surroundings that you're in and whether or not you're in like a safe place to thrive and succeed. But also, you know, there's a lot of research out there and people can Google around to find them from Harvard Business Review, from AAJA resources about like diverse boards of companies. Usually the companies make more money, right? Like diversity adds business value, especially in the era that we're in now with white nationalism on the rise, with like rampant racism happening in the country. It's super important that we have diverse voices at the table, that our coverage of communities of color is thoughtful and well done and not terrible like it is in so many newsrooms. It's like it's a lot of fires on a lot of fronts, right? It's, well, we need to hire more people of color, but we also need to promote more people of color. We also need to do a better job of covering people of color. We need to have better sourcing. We need to call Black doctors, not just for stories about Black patients, right? We need to call Muslim lawyers about things that aren't related to terrorism and stuff like that. So there's a wide spectrum, and so surely on that wide spectrum of like massive problems, there's somewhere you can move the needle. There's something that you can convince someone in your organization that it's worth fighting for. You might not get every single thing you want, but like recognize that those marginal little steps do help.
And do you have any tips for staying motivated and re-energized when you're doing this type of work?
Lean into the community, I think. So if you're part of the Journalists of Color Slack, if you're a member of your local AAJA chapter, find your allies, find the other people around you and celebrate each other's successes.
Do you have any like personal self-care regiments that you use when you need them?
Ooh, I used to do this thing called self-care bingo. And so I would make like a monthly bingo card in my planner, and I would make a list of like things I could do to relax that were anywhere from 5 minutes to 5 hours, right? And so I would have like a couple of 5-minute things, a couple of 10-minute things, a couple of hour-long things, and a couple of things that took like, you know, a couple hours, like getting a manicure or doing a face mask or going for a walk or calling my grandmother or, you know, like whatever the case is. I think having that list of like your go-to things that you know will make you feel better. It could even just be like, I've got 2 minutes to like calm down and I'm just going to jam on this playlist for the next 5 minutes, right? Like it can be anything that just like allows you to recenter. I really like the app Calm. It's a meditation app that I use to help fall asleep at night and like when I need to calm down during the day. That's really helpful. I think it's just really recognizing like how your soul refuels itself. Do you need to be around other people? Do you need to be with your partner? Do you need to be alone? Do you like to be inside? Do you like to be outside? Do you want to go somewhere? Do you want to, you know, like I think that the like journalist trope of like, I'm just going to bury my sorrows in a bottle of scotch is like really unfortunate. It's kind of damaging, I think like in a lot of ways, and kind of dangerous, right? So I think that it's finding your people that you can go to on any day and say like, I'm having a bad day. And those are the people who are going to send you puppy gifts and, you know, buy you a cup of coffee or whatever. And then also it's about knowing when you've reached your limit, right? Like take that sick day, take a mental health day, like don't answer your phone, Slack on the weekends, stuff like that. Like I used to put all of my work email, my Slack, my Trello, my Dropbox in a folder, and I'd move that folder to like the 5th screen off on my phone so that I wasn't constantly opening any of those apps. Twitter, off. Like I just would move them entirely, and I would just like hide the folder instead of going to the trouble of deleting all the apps. And that was really helpful. That like really shifted my weekends away from this constant like checking and churn.
That's a good tip. My last question is, you mentioned tapping into your communities for support. Could you talk a little bit about the role AAJA has played in your career?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to go to school in Minnesota, where Minnesota has a pretty robust but small chapter. And so it was very intimate, and I had a lot of very close mentors who were like, here, you're going to be applying for these internships. Here, you're going to be going to convention. Here, go to Voices. And they really guided me through those first, all through college, those first few years of my career, and like really raised me as an adult, like thank you notes and how to do calls, how to dress, like all of these professional skills. And so, AAGA was like a priceless experience for me for those first few years, just to be around other people of color, to have that mentorship, to really recognize. I was lucky. I had a lot of people in my life who happened to come through AAJA who were very honest with me about my strengths and weaknesses, who were very encouraging of me when I was ambitious and aggressive and wanted to do crazy things. And so, yeah, AAJA was just a big part of that.
Nice. Okay. So is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we move to audience questions?
I think
so. Okay. Well, I don't see any questions on Twitter or Facebook, but does anyone who's joined the call now want to, if they have a question, you can unmute yourself and just ask directly. Any questions? Okay. Well, if there are no questions, we'll wrap up this webinar. Thank you so much to Emma for joining us today. This was such an awesome conversation and really great advice. And thank you to AAJA for hosting this. And hopefully we see you next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Emma.